Artwork depicting two armies clashing in a whirling melee is a staple of our codexes, and in these battle scenes, it's understandable that the victors in these situations are those whose book you are currently reading. But why is it that the Tau disproportionately bear the brunt of these losing battles? Is there some animosity among Games Workshop's art department that makes artists want to draw fire warriors getting torn apart by Typhus's destroyer hive, or battlesuits about to get sliced in two by Necrons? Maybe it's just a perception, but I'm not the only one who's noticed this. I think the real reason for this is that Tau have always been universally poor in the combat phase. So it just makes good sense for these up-close battles to depict the Tau getting ground down to a blue mush. But after flicking through the new Tau Codex, which was kindly sent to me by Games Workshop, I was pleased to see that at least the battlesuits are getting a little beefed up in the assault phase. So with this in mind, I sought to right the wrongs done to the Tau in the combat phase and build an assault-ready Tau battlesuit. I'll be giving this guide only 2 dead animal bits out of 5. I'll only be using a single component from another kit, alongside a small amount of sculpting with green stuff. For the rest of the conversion, I used the regular Tau Crisis Battlesuit and removed all the components required to build one from the sprue before shaving away any sprue tabs or mold lines. With everything cleaned up, I then assembled the torso and the waist together, but I didn't glue the two sections together just yet. Now, I've always found the regular Crisis Battlesuit to be a little too squat in the torso. The commander, ghost keel, and even the broadsides proportions are fine, but the Crisis models just look a little smaller than they are depicted in the artwork. In order to extend the torso, as well as creating a slightly more dynamically posed miniature, I first did some dry fitting of the ball and socket joint in order to ensure the final result would look natural. With a rough position in mind, I then brought in my pin vise, fitted with a 1mm drill bit. With this, I then drilled a hole into the right side of the Tau's ball joint, just slightly behind the seam. I also carefully angled the pin vise away from the seam, so that the hole it created didn't sit completely perpendicular to the surface. Into the hole, I then superglued a length of 1mm steel wire and clipped this down, just so it was easier to work with. From here, I positioned the two pieces at the same angle that I intended to glue them, and brought them together until the protruding wire touched the inside of the socket. The tip of the wire was then used to scratch a mark on the plastic, which would serve as a way of indicating precisely where I needed to drill my second hole. With the second hole marked and drilled, I could check the fit. The wire was much too long though to properly fit inside the chest cavity, so it needed trimming down just a little. With this done, and with the wire fitting properly, I could superglue the wire into the second hole. Luckily, everything lined up perfectly, and I managed to achieve the position I was looking to create. All I needed to do then was to attach the frontal torso piece. With this done, I was left with a gap between the ball joint and the torso. This was because the angle between the two parts was a lot more pronounced than it was designed for, but also because I extended the height of the torso a little bit too. To fill this gap, I turned to the ever useful green stuff. With my green stuff cut and mix, I rolled some out into a narrow sausage and added this to the gap on the left side of the waist. I made sure that I kept the diameter of the sausage slightly larger than the gap, just to ensure that it sufficiently blocked up that empty space. Once in place, I used a metal sculpting tool to press down and form an edge, essentially creating the appearance of an additional ring against the torso piece. With the left side complete, I continued this across the other side. During this process, I made sure to use some Vaseline to make sure that my fingers and tools didn't stick to the green stuff. Once I'd given the green stuff plenty of time to cure, leaving it overnight should be sufficient, I then wiped away the remaining Vaseline from the surface. I simply used a paper towel for this, which was adequate enough to remove any residue. If you wanted to err on the side of caution though, you could also dip your paper towel into a little isopropyl alcohol first. This should prevent the risk of the paint not sticking properly later on. With the torso complete, I could move on to the arms. I wanted to attach a plasma rifle, but I felt that the length of the barrel was just a little too long and unwieldy for easy use in close combat situations. To resolve, I began using my razor saw to remove the muzzle from the barrel. I simply followed the existing seam here and tried to keep the cut as straight as possible. Once the muzzle was removed, I repeated this process further down the barrel, using one of the other seams as a starting point. With both cuts completed, I could clean up the edges and ensure that they were both as flat as possible. This was done using a combination of my knife and file. Once I was happy with both surfaces, I could glue them together before finally attaching the plasma rifle to the left arm. For the right arm, I wanted to really go against the grain and arm my battlesuit with a blade. This choice of weapon is highly unusual. Beyond Commander Farsight and Ethereals, there isn't much in the way of melee weapons available for the Tau. But with their new ability to fire their ranged weaponry even within engagement range, I thought that this could easily represent the damage done by a fusion blaster or a plasma rifle. Plus, it would look a lot cooler than just wielding another ranged weapon. My choice was one of the ghost swords from the Eldar Wraithguard. This was perfect. It was in the right scale for the model of this size. It had a suitably alien style, and best of all, it only had 3 fingers and a thumb, just like the Tau do. But I couldn't just use a sword as is. First, I need to remove the gems from the blade to help distance the weapon from its Eldar origins. The hand was also shortened. I clipped away the wrist to allow the hand to sit a little more realistically against the battlesuit's arm. Finally, from the back of the hand, I carefully shaved away and smoothed the surface, using my knife just to help it blend better into the smooth, featureless surfaces of the rest of the battlesuit. With all of these adjustments complete, I could glue the hand to the very end of the battlesuit's arm. The result mimicked that of the Tau commanders and gave me much more intimidating weapon with which to equip my Crisis Battlesuit. The next modifications came with the legs. The hip joints come with small tabs that lock them into fixed positions. I wanted to have a little more freedom in how I position them, so I first clipped away these tabs before shaving them smooth. Now that I could position the legs how I wanted, I glued them into place, with the left leg angled directly beneath the torso and the right leg fitted in a slightly raised position. Following the legs, the arms were then glued into place too. The arms were positioned to match that of the legs, with the right arm being extended out from the body. Now that the bulk of the model had been built, I now had to figure out how to attach it to the base in a way that matched the pose I had adopted. Attaching the foot flat against the base wouldn't work, so I opted to instead build a small rocky outcrop for the foot to rest against. This tactical rock would be constructed from small chunks of cork floor tile. I tore this up into small, uneven chunks and stacked them one on top of the other to create a rough, rocky outcrop. Against this, I checked how the battlesuit's left foot fitted and made sure that the angle made sense. Once I was happy, I superglued the rocks, fixing them into place. The foot was brought in again, and once I'd found a good position for it, I made a couple of pencil marks so I didn't lose a place, and then superglued the foot to the rocks. The problem with only having one foot holding up the whole of the model was then that all this weight would be going through a very narrow ankle joint. This probably wouldn't last very long, so I decided to do a little pinning to help strengthen the ankle. I used my pin vise once again to go into the bottom of the left leg, making the hole as deep as possible without going out the other side. Into this, I superglued some wire and clipped it down so that it was easier to work with. I then drilled another hole into the foot, going through the cork and the base. The other end of the wire was then glued into this as well before any protruding wire was clipped away from beneath the base. Finally, the right foot was then glued to the remaining leg. And with that, the battlesuit was very nearly completed. All that I needed to do then was to build the head before also pinning this and the shoulder pad, just to make painting them easier. More cork rocks were then added to the base before some textured paint from Vallejo was applied to fill in any gaps. All left to do now was to give this miniature a suitable paint job. And here we have the completed Crisis Battlesuit, reposed, rearmed, and ready for the combat phase. I chose to paint this model in the colours of the Farsight Enclave. This made the most sense to me as it's an unorthodox weapon choice tied nicely into their more renegade views. The result is exactly what I set out to create. I wanted something that didn't look overly converted from the original model, but still looked unique and interesting. It was also a good exercise in not relying on parts from other kits and instead making heavy use of techniques like reposing and sculpting. Now, this was the first Tau conversion guide that I've covered on this channel, so if you enjoyed it or would like to see more, then let me know in the comments below. Also, if you're interested in how I painted this model, I adapted one of Juan Hidalgos' wonderful painting guides, which I'll link to below. But before I go, I'd just like to say a big thank you to my ever generous supporters. Currently, my top supporters on Patreon are Jonathan Hart, Ryan Little, Stuart Smith, Tim, Berserker, Daniel Dowling, Dakota the Destroyer, Jake, Jeremy Kaup, Jesse Smith, Casper Limborg, Matthew Chilamidos, Mr. Grimm, and Swedsman. So a big thank you to you guys, and if you also support me on Patreon, buy me coffee, or you just use my affiliates links, then it is the kind-hearted people such as yourselves that help to keep this channel going. And so until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.